ProLock ransomware is showing us exactly how far ransomware has come.
Hey Manny, what story do you have for us today?
This is ProLock ransomware. So the same actors that were behind ProLock back in late 2019 were the same actors that were behind PoneLocker. So PoneLocker back then in late 2019, they had some problems with PoneLocker. So unfortunately, what ended up happening is the encryption key could be recovered from the actual malware. So these were actually sent into companies. They would encrypt files. But what the security researchers ended up finding out is that within the actual malware, they had given the keys to decrypt the files. So obviously that was a major bust. And then in March of this year, the same actors created ProLock. So PoneLocker turned into ProLock. And unfortunately, the bad actors still, evolution of this this particular piece of ransomware, the evolution is that we are now sitting here and the version of ProLock, this new version, still has some issues. So it's these bad actors who are sort of playing around with this ransomware, trying to make it better, but still having issues. So this latest one had an issue where even if you paid and you sent them the money, the decryption process a lot of times would actually corrupt your files. So this one actually got the attention of the FBI. The FBI actually sent out an FBI flash back in, I think, in March of this year, warning everybody that if you've gotten hit with this ProLock, that you have to be very careful, even if you end up deciding that you need to pay for this, that you may end up not getting all your files back because the process of decrypting them may actually corrupt your files. So fast forward to sort of today, and today this version of ProLock, the latest version of ProLock, well, actually I think all the versions of ProLock up to this point, one of the things that sort of distinguishes it from all the other pieces of ransomware that we've seen, well, not all, I think we've seen some of this stuff, but what it does is it leaves the first 8 kilobytes of a file intact. So when it gets into your environment, it's actually looking to encrypt the file, but it actually leaves that first 8 kilobytes of that file intact. Now, some of the reasoning behind why to leave 8 kilobytes of a file intact, and by the way, if the file the file is less than 8 kilobytes long, it doesn't encrypt the file, so it leaves those alone. But some of the reasons behind it were, at least the story states, that it was to bypass encryption detection tools. So some tools that are out there to detect encryption may actually just look at that sort of first piece of the file and may be fooled because that first 8 kilobytes of the file is actually not encrypted. So it actually may fool those detection tools. And also file type identification tools also would potentially be fooled by this. The story also goes into saying that it would also give you a false sense of security if you don't see that a lot of your files have been encrypted. But I tend to not sort of agree with that particular reasoning because, again, to give you a false sense of security isn't the purpose of here to scare the living daylights out of you into paying. So I'm not sure that I agree with the false sense of security. This particular one also has the executable itself is actually hidden in a BMP image, and then they use a PowerShell script to extract the code actually from that BMP, which is interesting. It's not the first time we've seen it, but the BMP that actually gets sent out is this black box. And the only way that you can sort of tell that there's anything wrong with that black box is that in the upper right-hand corner, you do see some distortion of the pixels, which kind of gives you a clue that there's something going on with that picture. And then some of the other things that this particular one does is it uses Windows functions to call to look for running processes, and then it actually checks those running processes against a list that it knows, and so it actually goes and shuts down certain processes, right, based on known processes that would interfere with the encryption process. And then the last thing that it actually does is it actually uses the net.exe command in Windows to attempt to shut down about 150 different services associated with all kinds of different enterprise apps, including security processes that may be running on the box. So we've seen that before, but running it up against a list of about 150 looking for that is quite unique to this. And then it does things like deleting the shadow copies of local files, which obviously will make it much harder for a company to sort of get back their files if they think that they're safe with the shadow copies that are stored locally. So, a lot of interesting things, I think, with this particular ransomware. So,
well, I have a couple of things that came to mind as you were talking about it. So the first thing is you started with something happened in 2019 where some adversaries were using this one type of ransomware and they switched to another. So even as the ransomware gets detected and companies or security tools get better at detecting that specific piece of malware, the adversary's goal isn't stopped. Until these people are kind of discovered and maybe brought to justice, they're actually going to continue doing this. They're going to continue finding other pieces of ransomware, and they're going to continue running that or tweaking it or doing all this other stuff because their appetite is kind of wet in a sense since we're seeing the ransoms go so high. I think another trend that I think is very worrisome is when we talked about ransomware like 5 years ago, it was all like, hey, individual computers that, you might be browsing the internet or you got something and your individual computer got some kind of ransomware on it. But it seems like, at least in the first half of this year, it seems like a lot of the ransomware campaigns are a lot more advanced now, where they don't care about an individual computer. What they'll do is they'll actually determine is this a home computer or is this like a corporate asset, and then they'll root around and, like you mentioned, they'll go and they'll disable security tools, they'll disable backups, and really work kind of hard for a bigger payout or a bigger ransom, where a company will probably not be able to say no to paying it. So I feel like it's kind of troublesome, some of these latest trends. I hope that as more people who become victimized report it to law enforcement, that law enforcement agencies will be able to discover who's behind these campaigns and hopefully bring those criminals to justice, because that might be the only way to stop something like this.
That story talks about what ransomware or malware was at one point, which was like massively destructive. And then we went into, like you said, where ransomware was targeting the individual. And so they were going after the individual and trying to get, whatever, the $500 or $1,000 out of the person because they didn't want to lose their pictures. But now, again, you're going after the companies, and now you've got like sort of a mixture of the two. You've got the destructive part of it because these folks want to come in, they want to root around your network to figure out where are you doing stuff, where's your security, where are your backups, right? Where can I encrypt files where it's going to make the most sort of impact to your everyday business? Because if I do that, I'm more likely to get you to pay the ransom up, when once I launch this. So it's like I go in there, I try to be as destructive as possible, but I'm also holding the key so that as soon as you pay, I can sort of give you the key, you can turn it and then sort of get back to business, right? Whereas before, I think the destructive was, hey, I'm just going in there, I'm going to destroy everything, I'm going to wipe stuff out, and I don't care, right? It's just I'm making a point.
I think it's interesting though, because as you become more sophisticated, the idea is that there's less people who can really do that. If it was just somebody who was, trying to, like a kid and who could do a little bit and just break into their grandmother's computer, it's a lot different than what they're talking about here. And so as this progresses and it becomes, the defenses get better. Hopefully companies get better at protecting their own devices and their own networks. And then it's like an arms race. You would think that law enforcement, you'd hope that it becomes narrower at the top of the pyramid to try to figure out who these guys really are. Because as you've said, they've already learned what they've done wrong in the past, and then they get better. This is not just this is not a simple effort to do this. And I think that's an interesting trend as well. I also thought it was interesting about them actually sneaking around and trying to find out about your insurance, your premiums or how much because I think that's it's much easier if you're in for insurance, right? It's a lot easier to just say, let them, that's what I'm paying the premiums for, no decision here. Yep. So is the insurance a good trend or a bad trend? Because of course it makes it easier to pay because it's not really out of your pocket.
I think insurance is actually probably a good trend overall. And the reason is because maybe people don't understand security, but everyone understands money. Everyone understands money. And with insurance, actually, I have a feeling premiums are going to go up because of all, as the insurance companies pay out more for ransomware attacks, the premiums are going to go up. And the insurance companies, they never want to lose money. So they'll actually get better at auditing corporations or individuals or the insured, really, to make sure that, as in other insurance markets, that they are as buttoned up as can be and they have the best practices. And they'll probably, I can see one day, maybe 10 to 20 years from now, where, just like with cars now, you could put like a little device that lets the insurance company track how you're driving. I could totally see like 20 years from now, you got to run a little insurance agent on all your computers so they can tell exactly your posture at any given time so they can give you the best rate or kind of bill you appropriately for your insurance premiums. But as those premiums go up, the market forces will probably, play out a little bit. And I think in a way it'll force people to become more secure as they're trying to get insurance, which I think is true pretty much. Like if you want to drive a car, you got to get insurance. So you're going to do what you have to do, to get insurance, whatever the requirements are. And I think the same can be said about cybersecurity insurance as well.
And I think, Stan, you should probably patent that idea to insurance companies.
Well, just remember, you heard it first on ThreatTraq. So.